Hey guys, guess who? Yes, it's me again, your favorite social studies teacher of all time. Well, let's not waste any time, let's get right into it. Last time we met, we started in our note packet called Creating a Government. In it, we discussed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, our very first Constitution. We talked about a positive during the reign of the Articles of Confederation, and that was the settling of the Northwest Territory. And then we talked about the negative, which was Shays' Rebellion, which showed that this weak central government under the Articles of Confederation ran into problems because it did not have the ability to tax, and it did not have an executive branch to enforce the laws and put down social unrest like Daniel Shays and the farmers in Massachusetts did in the Shays' Rebellion. So we have a problem. We need to come together and talk about how this is going. And then this is going to lead us to the Constitutional Convention. So you should be on page 3, and we're going to be starting by building a typical Constitutional Convention delegate, who these people were. So like I said, the government officials realized that after the Shays' Rebellion, there is a change that needed to be done. Again, number one, the central government could not tax, and it could not enforce the laws, and then they had the trouble with social unrest with Daniel Shays. So a convention of representatives from each state were called upon to meet in Philadelphia in 1787. Now this is like May-ish, 1787. Remember, Daniel Shays' Rebellion happened in January of 1787. They were to meet at the State House in Philadelphia. This is going to be the site of the convention. Here's a shot of the inside of the room where they met, where the convention took place. You might recognize this in the movie National Treasure, the first one, where they were trying to steal the Declaration of Independence. This is also the room where the Declaration of Independence was debated and signed. Now, 74 men were asked to be at this convention. However, only 55 delegates are going to be able to show in Philadelphia. You may have seen this painting done of the Constitutional Convention, where you have the President of the Congress, which is George Washington, and you have Ben Franklin over here, and James Madison. You have a lot of the famous people that we're used to talking about here. So who's at this convention? Who are these people? What on average, what are they like? Age-wise, the average age of a delegate was 44 years old. Now, looking at the oldest and the youngest person, Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania was the oldest person at 81 years old. And then the youngest is Jonathan Dayton from New Jersey, and he was the youngest at 26 years old. So they had a wide range, going from 26 to 81, but the average being 44. Now let's look at their experience. A typical delegate, most had some experience as politicians in their states in the first place, so they were used to this. Actually, many of them, or 40 of the 55 delegates, had already been members of the Continental Congress, the Congress that brought us the Declaration of Independence. So these are the men that the Americans trusted in declaring independence. These are going to be mostly made up of the men who's going to lead us in changing our Constitution to make it better. Now, what jobs do these men typically hold? 34 of the 55 were lawyers, but not just lawyers. It also included soldiers and planters, teachers, ministers, doctors, financiers, and merchants. Now, if you take a look at the wallet of these gentlemen, most were very wealthy, and many, especially from the southern colonies or southern states, are going to be slave owners also. And this is going to end up being a big controversy at the Constitutional Convention as we go forward. And race, obviously, all the delegates were white men. Now, who's going to be left out of this process at the convention? Who does not have representation? None of the delegates are going to be African American, Hispanic, women, or anyone who is poor. So that's a look at what a typical delegate looks like at the Constitutional Convention. All right, now let's take a look into the convention itself, and you will want to then move on to page 4 of your packet. So of the convention, only 12 states of the 13 are going to show up. Rhode Island, remember, who shot down Robert Morris's import tax, is the same colony, the smallest colony, that's not going to show up at the convention. Kind of a thorn in the side of everybody here, with Rhode Island refusing to send any delegates to the Constitutional Convention. They feared that all they were going to do is create a strong and powerful central government, and they did not want to have any part of it. So the delegates here in Philadelphia had two choices to make. They could, number one, just go through and revise or fix the Articles of Confederation, or they could scrap it all together and write a totally new form of government. So the Articles of Confederation, their form of government with one legislative branch and a weak central government, really basically only lasts for 7 to 8 years, and we can see that it has a lot of troubles because there's a lot of things it did not have the power to do. All said and done, the delegates decided to write a new form of government, but the challenge to them was to create a strong national government, but one that would not overpower the states or infringe upon the rights of the people. I like this one quote by Patrick Henry. He's a guy who brought us the two famous quotes, "If this be treason, then make the most of it," and "Give me liberty or give me death." But another quote I like by him, he says, "The Constitution is not a tool to restrain the people. It is a tool to restrain the government." So the Constitutional Convention was held in the summer of 1787, again, the summer right after the Shays' Rebellion, in the city of Philadelphia, or Brotherly Love. It is the capital of the United States of America at this time. Take another look at the actual building here. And through this picture in here, because this is where the Constitution sits today in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Now, we're not going to go here, unfortunately, on the D.C. trip, because typically the lines are 2 to 3 hours long just to see these amazing documents here. So, unfortunately, we won't be there. Again, another painting, another famous painting done of the Constitutional Convention, again with George Washington in the forefront, and again you have Ben Franklin here. So again, there were 55 delegates at the Constitutional Convention. These delegates were sworn to secrecy, so they could talk freely, and Washington, being the president of the convention, took this very, very, very seriously. As a matter of fact, on one of their breaks, Washington found that someone had left their notes behind, and when they came back from their break, he lambasted them by saying, "We swore to secrecy, and here you are being foolish, leaving these notes here." They wanted secrecy so that they would not be influenced by the public, by propaganda. They wanted to be able to talk freely amongst themselves, even if they were talking about things that were unpopular or something that people may not like, but they wanted to feel that they could talk freely. The funny thing about this convention, they were sworn to secrecy, so what they would do is close the doors and the windows to this to the State House. And on record, to this point, it is the hottest summer, and so these men were suffering inside this convention room, but they kept the windows closed because they wanted that absolute secrecy. Some people of the Constitutional Convention. James Madison, he is going to read more than 100 books in preparation for the convention. He studies long and hard all of the governments of the world since man has been on earth to see what could work, what could be unique, what could last the test of time. Two gentlemen who were not at the convention that a lot of us are probably wondering is Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They're not at the convention because they are overseas acting as ambassadors for the United States. Jefferson was in France and John Adams was in England. And lo and behold, these two are going to be ultimate rivals, especially in the 1800 presidential election. Our man Patrick Henry is going to absolutely refuse to attend the convention because he smelled a rat. He thought that they were heading back into a monarchy, and again, he wanted no part of that whatsoever. As I told you before, George Washington, there's the applause. George Washington comes out of retirement to lead this convention. Many of the leaders, political leaders and the delegates there begged him to come back out of retirement, and they felt that if the people knew that George Washington was leading the convention, it would give this convention a lot of credibility. They trusted George Washington, and they trusted that he would not allow them to create a too strong of government that would take away their rights. Another statesman who had a lot of influence at the convention was Benjamin Franklin. He is the famous scientist, statesman. He was a guy who provided a lot of humor at the convention, but also a lot of wisdom. Many people respected having Ben Franklin there. James Madison, who studied for this convention, who came up with some ideas that ended up being basically the foundation for the Constitution. James Madison is going to be known as the father of the Constitution because his ideas was, again, the foundation. And George Washington was unanimously selected as the president of the convention, or the presiding officer. So at this convention, after they decide that they are going to write a new form of government, there's going to be a lot of issues that they're going to have to work out, and that's going to lead us to compromise. Let's take a word at the word compromise. Take a look at the word compromise. It's a noun, a settlement of differences in which each side makes concessions or gives in a little to come to a result which both solves a problem. And the three major compromises we're going to look at the convention were, number one, the Great Compromise, number two, the 3/5 Compromise, and number three, the Trade Compromise. So right off the bat, the major debate was over how are we going to set up the legislative branch. There's going to be a major battle between small states and large states or big states. Now, I'm not talking about square mileage. What I'm talking about is population. The small populated states versus the big populated states. That's where the first debate is going to come down. So several states are going to submit their plan for the type of legislature they want. There were two major plans. They were the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. Both of these plans calls for 3 branches of government. So unlike the Articles where there was just one branch, we now are looking at 3 branches of government. So let's take a look at the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan is going to be based proportionally or proportional, which means that representation is going to be based on population or how many people are living in that state. The Virginia plan, which was basically the mastermind of James Madison, was to make the legislative branch into 2 houses. This is called bicameral. Bi meaning 2, cam meaning chamber. Madison's plan was that we would have 2 competing chambers, so that no one chamber would become more powerful than the other, because there was, by design, going to be given a lot of power to this legislative branch, or to Congress as we know it today. And in the Virginia plan, though, they stated that they wanted both houses to be assigned representatives based on their population. Of course, this is going to make the largely populated states pretty happy, because they're going to end up with more representation, therefore more power. Now, obviously, the small states are not going to be happy with the Virginia plan, which representation is based on population. New Jersey says, whoa, hold on. Now, what about us little guys? Well, the New Jersey plan does not have the bicameral House or bicameral legislature. They were just calling for a one-house legislature. But here in the New Jersey plan, they wanted equal representation. Each state is going to have the same number of votes regardless of the population. They felt that this would give small states just as much representation as the largely populated states. So now we have a battle. Do we have representatives based on population, or should it be equal? And how can we get the two sides to come together? I mean, right here at this point, delegates were about ready to walk out on the convention. So this leads us to the Great Compromise. Another name is the Connecticut Compromise, which was presented by Roger Sherman of Connecticut. So let's take a look at the Great Compromise. They decided that the legislature would indeed have two houses. So they're going to take the idea of the Virginia plan with a bicameral Congress. So here's the compromise that they came up with. The Senate, or the upper house, the number of representatives there are for each state going to be equal, and that is 2 senators. So no matter what state you're from, New York or Rhode Island, Virginia or New Jersey, it's going to be 2 senators per state that are going to serve in the upper house chamber, or the Senate. Now the lower house is called the House of Representatives. This was going to be based on population. Now, Wyoming is a pretty big state, for example. However, they only have about 500,000 people living in Wyoming. They're only going to get 1 representative in the House of Representatives. But if you take a look at California, which has a huge population, it's probably near 40 million at this point now, they actually now have, this is wrong, but they now have 53 representatives, with the 2 senators giving them 55 electoral votes. So you can see that this is going to benefit the large states, where in the Senate it's going to benefit the small states. All right, just another visual to break this down. Our Congress, the legislative branch, the law-making body of our country, is broken down. It is bicameral. It has 2 chambers. The upper chamber is the Senate. Today, it has 100 members because we have 50 states, and every state has an equal number, and that is 2. The lower house, the House of Representatives, has 435 members. Again, this is going to be based on the population. And here is a map breaking down the total number of representatives in Congress. Obviously, you're going to see California is going to have a lot more than Indiana. Texas is going to have a lot more than Kentucky. And these numbers also play into the fact for the Electoral College, as we discussed earlier. All right, so you have a page in your note packet, page number 4, that looks just like this slide. And so you're going to want to maybe pause the video to make sure you get this all written down. But I'll go through it one box by one box to help you fill this out. So in review, the Virginia plan is calling for a 2-house or bicameral legislature. The number of people in the Congress are going to be set by population. This is good for the big states. The small states say, hold on, we don't like this. We're going to have our own plan. The New Jersey plan is going to call for a one-house legislature. And its representatives are going to be based on equal representation, meaning each state is going to have 2 representatives regardless of the size. So we're at an impasse here. Do we go with population or do we go with equal? Is it proportional representation, equal representation? Well, they decided to split our legislative branch into 2 chambers. We have the Senate, we have the House of Representatives. Again, this is bicameral. So the upper house is going to be based on equal representation. Each state gets the same number of votes. And in the House of Representatives, it's going to be based on population. So the bigger the state in population, the more representatives they will get. They'll get a little more voice in the House of Representatives. Again, if you need to, pause this video so that you can get the screen down and the notes written on page 4. All right, so we resolved that issue. That could have been a close one. That almost ended the convention right there. But now the next major issue is going to be how we're going to decide on slavery. Are we going to count them for population and for the purpose of taxation? So this is now going to come down to a battle between the northern states and the southern states. The compromise that saves the convention on this issue of slaves, how do we count them for taxation representation, is going to be settled by the 3/5 compromise. Here's the problem. Should slaves be counted as population for taxes and or determine representatives in the legislature? Here's what the North wants. The North wants slaves not to be counted to determine representatives, because that would just give the South more representation, therefore more power. However, they do want the South to count slaves for the purposes of taxation. After all, slaves are property and you need to pay tax on property. And on the opposite side, you have the South. They want the slaves to be counted to determine representation in Congress, because this will just give them more power through more representation. However, they do not agree with the idea of counting slaves for purposes of taxation, because they were human beings. That was their argument at the time. So we're now at an impasse between the non-slave states and the slave-holding states. So we come up with a 3/5 compromise. The compromise made was to count slaves as 3/5 of a person. This was going to be used for taxes and to set up the number of representatives in Congress. So another way to think about it, instead of thinking of a person being broken down into 3 parts of 5 parts, you can look at it this way. For every 5 slaves, only 3 were going to be counted. Only 3 were going to be taxed. Only 3 were going to be counted for representation. This is why it's called the 3/5 compromise. All right, and another source of contention for these delegates at the convention was the slave trade. The northern states had agreed to do nothing about slave trade until 1808, 20 years later. It came to a point in the convention where the southern delegates, after they laid down the foundation for the Great Compromise, after they had laid down how they were going to count slaves for representation and for taxation, Southerners were about ready to walk out when the northern state says we should get rid of the slave trade. And the Southerners were ready to walk out. But the Northerners kind of just kicked the can down the road by saying, okay, we won't do anything for another 20 years. And so the Southern states then agreed to allow the national government to watch over or to regulate the slave trade. So in compromise, no state gets everything that they want, but they write a constitution that they thought would work overall and appeal to most people. All right. Now, the next section of our notes is the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So, once the Constitution is written, that's only half the battle. They have to go, the Constitution has to go through the rigorous process of being ratified or approved on the state levels. So each state is now going to hold a ratification convention to vote yes or no on this new Constitution. So they can vote for it or they can vote against it. And unlike the Articles of Confederation, where you needed all 13 states to agree or have a unanimous decision, in this process, they knew that all 13 wasn't going to work. So in order to ratify the Constitution, they needed 9 states out of the 13 to ratify or approve the Constitution. With the Constitution, we have a government that is set up as a federalist government, or federalism. And this is a system of government in which power is going to be shared between the national government and the state governments. So right away, two groups are going to go out and propagandize, campaign for and against the Constitution during the ratification process. One group was the Federalists, who agreed with this idea of federalism in the Constitution, so they were for, or yes, for the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, just as the prefix would suggest, did not want the Constitution. They were afraid that it would lead to a strong central government, one that would take away rights of the people. So the Federalists are like, yes, everyone, go out and vote for it. This is the best plan available. Now, on page 7 of your note packet, you have a T-chart of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. We're going to look at some of the arguments for the Federalists and why they supported the Constitution. Number one, they did support taking some of the powers from the states and give it to the national government, because under the Articles, where states had a lot of the power, it just was weak and ineffective. Number two, the Federalists wanted to divide the power among the different branches of government. So you have the legislative branch, judicial branch, and the executive branch. Now these branches were to be co-equal, meaning they would all have the same amount of power. The Federalists wanted a single person to lead the executive branch. They thought if we had too many co-presidents that the executive branch would be inefficient and ineffective and then weak and not able to enforce the law. They felt that it was better that one person make the hard decisions and make them quickly. Now the Anti-Federalists said, no, don't vote for this. We need a Bill of Rights. Some arguments on the Anti-Federalist side of the chart. Remember that federalism is the sharing of power between national and state governments. The Anti-Federalists wanted, like in the Articles, to keep the states the most important powers. They believe that the things that are really going to affect people's lives, those powers need to stay closer to the states and not so close to the national government. And argument number two is they wanted the legislative branch to have more power than the executive branch. So there'd be more power and persuasion here in Congress than, say, the executive branch or even the judicial branch. The Anti-Federalists had feared that a single person in the executive branch might become a king or tyrant or become too powerful and get away with things that they shouldn't be able to. The Anti-Federalists wanted a group of presidents to run the executive branch. The Anti-Federalists believed, and this was really the cornerstone of their argument, they believed that a Bill of Rights needed to be added to the Constitution in order to guarantee and protect people's rights. These rights that we kind of take for granted today is like the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, no unreasonable search and seizure, no cruel and unusual punishment. These were all things that the Federalists said had to be lined out in the Constitution in black and white so that there is no confusion as to what the government can't do to you. So the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are going to go on a propaganda campaign to get each state convention to vote along their side. They printed in the newspapers, they created pamphlets, and etc. The Federalist Papers, who were written by the Federalists, was a series of essays which supported the Constitution and wanting the Constitution being passed. Some important people of the Federalist Papers, or authors of the Federalist Papers, were James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. Now the Federalists are going to have an advantage in this ratification battle because most of the newspaper, or the people who controlled the press, supported the cause of the Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists were fighting an uphill battle. So in June of 1788, a total of 9 states had then passed or ratified the Constitution. And that's all they needed was 9 states to formally make this their legal form of government. But there are 2 very important states missing in the ratification process. That was the state of New York and Virginia. And these were the 2 largest states. These are 2 of the most powerful states. But yet, so far, they have not ratified the Constitution. Now, with the 9 votes, they can go ahead and do it, but the United States of America looks divided if they do not have their 2 most powerful and most populated states coming on board with this Constitution. It would look very, very divided. And there were 2 important Virginians who fought the ratification of the Constitution. They were George Mason and again Patrick Henry were against the Constitution. They said if we were to ever support this, there must be a Bill of Rights in this Constitution. So after the Federalists appease Virginia and New York and say, hey, if you go ahead and ratify this, we will at a later time go ahead and add a Bill of Rights to make your side happy. So that then leads New York and Virginia to pass the Constitution. The only state left then is going to be Rhode Island, who never even showed up at the convention, but they, in order to look united with the other states, did officially ratify it in 1790 so that the United States of a government looked like a unified country. So the Bill of Rights. It is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that's going to ensure personal rights for each U.S. citizen. And in our next note packet, we're going to dig deeper into the Bill of Rights and learn what each one is. So, our Constitution is ratified, and now we just have to hammer out some details with the Bill of Rights. And when we meet again, we'll talk about what makes our Constitution unique.